absolutely fantastic, a real show of support for feminism. Your city, of course, has a proud history in all different movements, in the women's peace movement, trade unionism, and of course your very own women's centre. Yeah, very good. And you're one of the few cities actually to have retained that legacy of the women's liberation movement, which is a period that we call the second wave, when feminism is last considered to have been at its height in the UK from the late 1960s through to the 1980s. But feminism is far from history. As we know, there's been a resurgence of feminism and feminist activism across the UK, and events like yours here today have been held in towns and cities all across the country, from Aberdeen to Devon, and they're often led and organised by young women. There's over 80 local feminist groups listed across the country. There's at least 6 books being published on British contemporary feminism in the last couple of years alone. So something is definitely happening. And it started in the early 2000s as feminism began to be seen again on our streets. And not just online, not just on blogs and message boards, but in the newspapers, on the TV, not just in town halls, behind the scenes, but in town centres, on demonstrations, on pickets, outside beauty pageants and lap dancing clubs, on the student protests, anti-war marches and anti-cuts uprisings. Feminism is visibly on the march once again. Now, all of you obviously know why it's important to gather together as women in political action, because you've come here today to see what this conference has to offer. But all too often, of course, as we know, decisions are being made by those in power which affect women disproportionately, and yet women are underrepresented amongst those decision makers. And we don't need to look far for evidence of this. We're currently governed by an almost 80% male parliament, for example. We continue to face discrimination in other areas of life, in work, in culture, and indeed threats to our very lives themselves. Over 40 years since the Equal Pay Act, we are still facing a gender pay gap of around 15 to 19%, a pay gap that actually gets bigger the higher up you go, and which is of course higher in part-time work, the type of work most often done by women. Now, women's unemployment is actually at a 25-year high, as cuts to public services have affected a sector staffed by a 65% female workforce, a sector which women, of course, also rely on disproportionately. These are the results of the decisions of our Tory government, as we witness, of course, a familiar push back into the home, as women are expected to do for nothing in their own homes the caring work they previously did for low pay outside the home. Women continue to lose their jobs when they become pregnant, and the cost of childcare in this country remains a national disgrace and an international embarrassment. Male violence against women affects over 3 million women annually, including domestic abuse, rape, female genital mutilation, forced marriage and sexual assault. 2 women every week are murdered by a violent male partner or ex-partner. There are over 80,000 rapes every year, and yet our conviction rate for rape remains one of the lowest in Europe, hovering around 6%. Every night, on our streets, up to 5,000 young people will be exploited in prostitution to fulfil a demand that we are told to accept as inevitable. And while refugees with over 30 years of service are closing their doors due to lack of funds, licensed lap dancing clubs outnumber rape crisis centres in our cities. And these services are facing almost continual funding threats, and yet meanwhile, our unelected government seems to have the funds to consider waging war on other countries, while of course replacing our own weapons of mass destruction by updating the Trident nuclear arsenal. And all too often, in our media and in our culture, women continue to be objectified, when they are represented at all, that is, and indeed are sometimes absent altogether, as a white male monologue pronounces on our world, our environment, our families, and our communities. So conferences like this can set a balance to that backdrop. By bringing women together in inspiring and open political spaces, we can share our ideas and experiences, strategise, plan and raise our voices. And this is feminism in action. This is what feminism is all about. But because there are so many lies told about our movement, it is worth returning to some basics and clarifying just what feminism is and is not. Now, there are probably as many different definitions of feminism as there are people who call themselves feminist. I just want to put that out there as a disclaimer. But my version, as I define feminism, I see it as a global political movement for the liberation of women and society based on equality for all people. To my mind, our movement is not calling for the tables to be turned, for the world to stay the same, but with women in charge instead of men, because our movement is for change, not a changing of the guard. And feminism has certainly not been struggling for centuries for equality with unequal men. And that fact, in fact, dispels the grand lie we all know about feminism. You know, myth number 101, the lie that feminism hates men. Now, there are plenty of other stories told about feminism, of course, some of which are actually true, yet which we are supposed to be ashamed about. It is true, for example, now newsflash, I know this may come as a shock to some people, that some feminists are lesbians. It's true. I know this. It is also true that some feminists don't shave their legs. It's true. Yeah. Those are not stereotypes. They're not myths or caricatures. They're not throwbacks to a dusty old feminism that we need to talk about quietly and be ashamed about. They're current statements of fact. And it's time we stopped referring to them as if they are a bad thing, because this only exposes and underpins the sort of misogyny and homophobia that polices women's political identifications and indeed their sexuality as well. But to return to myth 101, the man question, in reality, feminism as a movement demonstrates a great faith in men, a faith that they can be the human beings they are, rather than tired and limiting stereotypes about what men supposedly should be. There would, after all, be no point in a revolutionary movement which did not believe in the potential of change, the belief that all of us can be better, that all of us can change. Feminism has never said that men are always this way or that, but men are naturally this way or that. You can read the classics, you can scour the archives, but you will never find a feminism that says that men are biologically violent, abusive, or warmongering. What you will find is a nuanced, complex, and relevant political theory which insists that patriarchy creates oppression, that men choose to rape and abuse, and that that choice is both a cause and a consequence of male supremacy, of a world where being female equals second class. And feminism is about recognising that. It means recognising that we live within a patriarchy or male-dominated society, and this is not theory. It's not the stuff of academic textbooks or women's studies degrees. It is real life. It is your life and mine, regardless of all our diverse backgrounds and experiences. What we all share is our experiences of sexism within male supremacy. And those experiences will vary, of course, based on many factors, on the position we inhabit, for example, on the social fault lines that fracture our society, fractures of class, wealth, race, disability, and sexuality. And women have a unique view on these structures, a valuable viewpoint. It is the perspective of those who have always been excluded, marginalised, owned, used and abused, written off and written out. It is the perspective of those who never made the rules, who were only ever meant to be ruled, at home, at work, and in the world. And it is only fairly recently, of course, thanks to the struggles of feminist activists, that we have gained basic rights to our own autonomy, to the right to work in formal employment, to have bank accounts, to wear the clothes we like, to control our own reproduction, to have an abortion if we need one, to own our own businesses, to prosecute violent partners. Yes, we have come a long way, thanks to the sisters who went before us, but we are nowhere near the equal world that we all know is possible, and which would be a better place for all of us, women and men. And feminism is the social movement to get us there, one of the oldest and most powerful social movements in the world, and it is criminal that so many women are disenfranchised from it, and ashamed to align themselves with it, ashamed to call themselves feminists. What is embarrassing about pursuing social justice and human rights for all? What is shameful about focusing on the most marginalised and abused in our society? What is wrong with demanding our say over the world that we share, the world that we build as well? And that's what we're here to do today, to raise women's voices, to learn what we always knew, that we have answers, answers to the most pressing problems our world faces today, problems of the masculinization of wealth and power, of militarism, environmental destruction, and short-sighted economics. These are the problems of patriarchy, and feminism is the cure. So thank you very much for being part of this conference today. I know lots of great things will come out of it. I know we're going to have a great day. And so, without further ado, we will move into the first panel, which deals with one of the key themes of the conference today,